So Boker Tov, Chodesh Tov. Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra, Mem Aleph, Bava Basra 41. Today's daf is dedicated to Shmira for the Chayolim, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, Yeshua for Am Yisrael, in this Chodesh Tov. So the daf yomi tells us on the top of Mem Aleph Amid Aleph at the Mishnah, Kol Chazaka She'eni Mataina Eina Chazaka. Any Chazaka, a chazaka can mean two things in our chapter. It can mean a proof that you live there and a action to acquire the entity. Here we're talking about a proof. So if you want to say I've been living here, so therefore it's a proof that it's proof that I can continue to stay there. It has to have a taina with it. It has to have a claim alongside it. And the Gemara is the Mishnah is going to specify what the claims are. But kol chazaka, any proof that doesn't have a claim associated with it, she'eni mataina, that justifies why you're there, eina chazaka. That's not a chazaka. Ketzad, what's an example of this? Oh, I also want to see if we can do a little bit of Membeis today, because I don't know exactly when we'll be able to do the next stop for Membeis. Even if I do it, I don't know if you're going to be able to join me, so we'll see how far we can get to that. So, kol chazaka she'eni matana eina chazaka. Any chazaka that does not have a claim associated with it is not a chazaka. Ketzad, what's an example of a chazaka that doesn't have a taina? Amar, well, let's say the ma'arer says, the complainer says to the one who's living in the property, Ma'ato sebetoch shali, what are you doing in my property? And he responds, hey, listen, buddy, I started living here. Nobody said anything to me. Guess what? Ain't a chazaka. That's not a proof. You have to say, Shemachartoli, you sold it to me. Shenatatoli b'matana, you gave it to me as a gift. Avicha macharli, your father sold it to me. Avicha nasnili b'matana, your father gave it to me as a gift. Harezu chazaka. That's a chazaka. It means you have to have a legal reason why you came to be in it. Not, hey, I was here, nobody said anything. Also, somebody comes along and he says that he inherited it from his father, and then he doesn't need a taina, because the assumption is his father had bought it. And so therefore, he's not required to know his father's real estate dealings. So Gemara says, Pshita, isn't it obvious if he doesn't have a taina, it doesn't have a chazaka? It's obvious. Why does our mission need to spell out that if he doesn't have a taina, it's not a chazaka? Gemara says, no, Ma'al you might have said, Hi Gavra, Mizban Zabnila. You might have said, really, we might have argued, listen, it's possible that the Ma'ara really sold it to the Machzik. But the guy who was the Machzik, the guy who's in possession of the property, he just doesn't know the law. And and really he had the land with a contract. The Irkos, and he lost the contract. The reason why he says, hey, nobody said anything to me was Savar. He thought, and this is not a crazy thought. We said, well, maybe he would have said to himself, if I would have said Mizban Zamnile, if I would have said he sold it to me, Hayara, this property, Amrili, then the court would have said to me, well, if you claim you bought it, show us your deed. So therefore, since he can't say it, maybe since he didn't say it, therefore, maybe we should claim it. Maybe we could be the ones to claim it, because maybe you had a contract and you lost it. And we might have thought, okay, like in a circumstance like this, we should open up our mouth for the mute. As the verse in Proverbs chapter 31 says, open katach picha, open your mouth for a mute. So basically the Gemara's logic is you might have thought that he was afraid to make the claim that he had a contract. So maybe we should make it on his behalf because he just doesn't know what he's talking about. Like we have sometimes in this chapter, Anan Taninan, we make the claim on his behalf. Mema form 41a in the middle. So we say, no, we don't do it. If he didn't make a taina, then he has no taina and he lost it. So now, Gemara says, Anav Siman. The Siman for the next three cases is Ayin Nun Beis, Anav, and we were going to have three separate cases. Ravanan, Shakal, Bidka, Ba'ara. Ravanan's property it was flooded. Also, Hadar Guda Ba'ari Dechavri. So then what happened was he went and he built the fence. He built the fence, but he ended up, and there's a lot of different interpretations of this story. Excuse me. He ended up building it in the property of his friend. So also coming to Rav Nachman. So he basically built the fence. He built it too far into the other guy's fence, into the other guy's property. So then the guy said after a while, "You're in my property." So Hadar Guda Ba'ara. He went back to also coming to Rav Nachman. He came to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, "I'm right. Zil Hadar, go back and remove your fence. You have to rebuild. You're in the wrong spot." So Ravanan said, but he let me stay there. He didn't object. Amarle, come on. So Rav Nachman says, who do you want to rule like Rav Yehuda, Rav Shmuel, that if the guy's there, then you don't need 3 years to establish a chazaka. It's immediate. Once the guy sees you there and doesn't object, then immediately it's a chazaka. We don't rule like Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shmuel. We don't rule like that. We rule that the chazaka, even if he's there, he has 3 years, not 1 day. So the Gemara says that Ravanan responded, but not only that, he didn't just not object. He waived his rights because he came and he helped me build the fence. The about that. He came and he built the fence with me. He was basically telling me, you could build a fence here. Now he wants me to tear down that fence and move it. Amarle, so Rav Nachman said, no, it was a mistaken waiver, meaning to say he had no idea that you were building it in his property. He just didn't realize that because he just didn't realize that. Well, he didn't realize you were building in his property because the so he said he was a mistake, and you yourself didn't realize that he was building it in his property, that you were building in his property, because you never would have done that. So just like you didn't realize, also he didn't realize, and so therefore it was a mistaken waiver. Mistaken waiver is not a waiver, and so therefore, you have to move your fence. Yes, Jeff.
I was surprised that they only did the initial. It seems like the case. I guess he's saying.
Yeah, he's saying, according to this explanation of the Rashbam, basically, we're adopting the Rashbam's approach for now because it's the easiest. That Ravanan has one claim. And this claim is the guy basically waived his rights to this portion of the land and he gave it to him. Through this Mechila, he gave it to him. But at first, Ravanan wanted to say, I have a chazaka, meaning to say, I have this property. And after Rav Nachman says, no, you can't have a chazaka less than 3 years, then Ravanan said, well, he waived his rights to me. And that Ravanan pushes that away because he says, listen, it was a mistaken waiver. He didn't mean to give it to you. But a lot of people have a problem with this. Tosfos says, well, first of all, this is like his second claim. So he makes 2 claims. So like that's what we say is Toin Choser Toin. We don't allow that. And also, if this was his first claim, then Rav Nachman should have said right away it's a mistaken waiver. So therefore, Tosfos gives a different explanation that he purchased it, and he had actually purchased it. That he comes and that's why it goes down in a different direction. Okay, now we're up to the second case, Rav Kahana. So this is the Nun, even though the Ayin is Rav Anan and the Nun is Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana shekel bitka ba'ari. Rav Kahana took his property was flooded. Also, other good ba'ari. He then built a fence in a property that wasn't his. We're on the top of Mem Aleph on the base, 41b. Also coming to Rav Yehuda, he came in front of Rav Yehuda. Also, I see Trey Sa'adi. So again, we have a similar case. And now the neighbor came to Rav Yehuda, and neighbor came to Rav Yehuda, and he brought him two witnesses. Chad Amar Tarti Utzisi Ayal, V'chad Amar Tlas Utzisi Ayal. So one of the witnesses claimed, listen, Rav Kahana went 2 rows deep into your property. And the other witness said he went 3 rows deep into your property. So they're both saying that he went in, but they're contradicting themselves. So Rav Yehuda says, Amalei Zil Shlim, go and pay. Tarti, go and pay 2. Migu Tlas, because you have to at least pay 2 out of the 3. Because they both are agreeing that you went in at least 2. Just one says you went in more. So Rav Kahana said, Amalei, come on. Rav Kahana said, who are you paskening like that? You're making me move it back 2 rows. To Rav Shimon ben Elazar, you paskening like Rav Shimon ben Elazar, Titania, Amar Rav Shimon ben Elazar, will nechaku bei Shammai. And nechaku bei Shammai mesil al shtei kitei edim, she'achas omeres mana, ve'achas omeres masayim, she'ish b'chal masayim mana. That Shimon Elazar says both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that if there are 2 groups of witnesses, i.e., 4 people come, 2 of the witnesses say the guy owes 100 and 2 say he owes 200, that everybody would say that since there's a valid set of witnesses that says you owe 100, you have to pay at least 100, even though they're contradicting each other. But Amanda, where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing, Al Katachas, where there's a total of 2 witnesses. You don't even have a full set of witnesses that say you owe specifically of 100. You have 1 witness that says you owe 100. 1 witness that says you owe 200. So in that case, Beis Hillel will say you have to pay the 100. Beis Shammai would say you wouldn't have to. But we see from here that that's the case that you're arguing. You're passing like Beis Hillel. So Rav Kahana continues and says, if that's how you're paskening, don't you? How can you do this? I'm going to bring you a letter from Eretz Yisrael. I got a letter. I got some rabbis in Israel, and they're going to say the law is not like Rav Shimon Elazar. That's what Rav Kahana says to Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, you don't scare me. Bring me the letter, and then I'll evaluate it. But when you go and bring it to me, I'll discuss it. In the meantime, sorry. So, Hugava the Dar, this is the 3rd case. Hugava the Dar Bekashta Baalisa Arba Shani. So there's a man who lived in a place called Kashta, and he lived in the basically the rooftop, the attic, the 2nd floor. He lived there for 4 years. Also, Mari de Besa. So the person who lived on the bottom floor came. Well, he never went upstairs to his attic. Suddenly, Ashkech, he found him living up there. I'm like, my bias by Besa. What are you doing? I don't want to say who. There's somebody who comes to our yeshiva who he had people living in his shed. His shed was in the backyard. He didn't go there all the time. And then his kid said, "Oh, there's a guy walking back and forth to our shed. There's a guy who just was squatting in the shed." We don't know how long the guy was living there, but 4 years is a long time, right? The master of the house went. Ashkechem, he found the guy. I'm like, my boss, my base. So what are you doing here? He says, he said, I bought it from this person, and this guy bought it from you. So I bought it, and from a guy I bought it from you. Also coming to Rebbe Chia, he says, well, if you have a witness that the guy you bought it from, even was living there one day, so you have a legitimate explanation that you really bought it from a guy who you thought owned it, and then since you also have the years of Chazaka, then you don't have to bring witnesses that this guy brought it from the owner. Because we say, just like we make a claim, we said about the heirs, he doesn't have to know all the deals of his father, and we say as long as he makes a claim, he got it from the father, so it's okay. So too, in this case, we'll make the claim since you saw him living there, that you just need to bring a proof that he lived there one day, and that'll be sufficient. If you have a witness that he was living there, the that'll be sufficient. Below, and if you don't have witness, then it won't be sufficient. So Rav says, I was sitting in front of Habibi. Who's Habibi? Habibi is his uncle, Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia had a brother and a sister who married each other, and they were Rav's parents. So Rav Chia was his uncle on both sides. They were allowed to marry each other because they were from two different entirely sets of parents. So anyway, he says, Rabbi Chia, so he says, I was sitting in front of Habibi, the Amile, and I said to him, why? He said, why do I have to prove that he lived there for at least one day? Maybe he just sold it the same night. He bought it and he flipped it. Why do I have to prove that he was there at least one day? And then I understood that what was his opinion? His opinion was if he would say, what he was really trying to say was, if you bought it in front of me, he bought it from you. Meaning this guy who I bought it from, he bought it from you in front of me, then he would be believed. Migu di boy, the reason why he's believed was a migu, because if he wanted to, he could really have said, I bought it from you. So that's what he's saying. He's saying, if he bought it from me, then if I saw him buy it in front of you, then he's believed. So that's what he thinks, that's what Rebbe Chia is saying. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, it's logical to say, Mike Rav Chia, that you can say that you've been living there for 3 years and you bought it from somebody who lived there at least one day, or that he was living, or you saw him buy it in front of that other person. Why? Why is it logical? Because we have our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? And I alluded to this before. Haba Mishum Yerusha, and if somebody wants to come and claim that he got something as an inheritance, he doesn't need to have a taina with it, because he doesn't need to claim that how his father got it. He just has to inherit it. So the Gemara says, but taina hu do abai. He doesn't need a taina. He doesn't need to say that his father bought it from somebody else, but haraya bai. But he needs to have a proof that his father really indeed did live there, and that's what Rebbe Chia is saying here. Gemara says, but wait, maybe just because it says he doesn't need a taina, why do you say that means he needs a proof? Maybe he doesn't need either. Or maybe a case of a purchaser, Rebbe Chia is going to say this halacha by a case of a guy who says, I purchased it, that is going to say he needs a proof, because you don't throw your money out without having proof. You buy. And so therefore, in that case, it's different. So the Gemara now asks the question: let's say you didn't actually see this guy buying it, but you saw him looking like he's going to buy it, like he was measuring it. He brought the inspector there. So is that assuming that he bought it? Is that proof that he bought it? Amar Abaye Abaye said same thing. Rava says, no, Avid English to see our article is oven. People sometimes will inspect the property and not buy it, so it's not a proof. Next piece. So the Gemara says, Shloshel Kuchos Mitzdarfim. What is this idea of Shloshel Kuchos Mitzdarfim? We say that you establish a chazaka after 3 years, but let's say we have a field, and the witnesses say that it was. I'm reading from the Rashbam and translating. Shloshel Kuchos Mitzdarfim. Rashbam says, Sadash Edim Shaitash Ruven Kol Yaman. There's a field that witnesses say it belonged to Ruven. Shimon Shana. And then Shimon got it for 1 year. Kitoin Shen Niknami Reuven. He claims he got it from Reuven. And then Shimon sold it to Levi with a contract. And Levi held it for a year. And then Levi sold it to Yehuda. And he wrote him a contract. And he held it for a year. So we have 3 years. And now Reuven comes along and says, I never sold it to Shimon. And Yehuda claims, we've been there between the 3 of us for 3 years. And you never objected. And Shimon, who got it from you, and so we're getting it from him. So basically, they have a taina that somebody bought it, but their chazaka is only through the combination. So is that going to be a legitimate chazaka or not? Shloshel kuchos mitzdarfen. That yes, he says the Gemara says the 3 different lekuchos can join together to make a chazaka, but that's only with the shtar. Amarav v'kulam the shtar. That's only with the contract.
Didn't say start the first one.
Rashbam didn't say the shtar for the first one, right? But the lekuchos have to have a shtar. Rashbam says the kimin the b'shtar lachuzem is that since that they bought it with a contract from each other, that therefore the witnesses on the contract are going to like spread the news, and then Reuven will know about it. And from the fact that he doesn't object, Reuven will lose. But without a contract, then Reuven can claim, listen, the reason why I didn't object is because not one of you held it for 3 years. And so therefore, I didn't think there was a chazaka. So the only time that this works is if there's a contract, there's a formal legal proceeding, and Reuven could have been expected to have heard about it. So that's what he's saying here. So this must mean the Rav is of the position. So it must be that Rav is of the position. If there's a contract, then the word will get out, and Reuven would have heard about it. But if there's just witnesses, then Reuven wouldn't have heard about it. But is that really the case? Well, I'm a Rav. I'm Mocher Sada Be'edim. That if you sell a field with witnesses, go that doesn't Rav say that if you sell a field with witnesses, you could collect even from property that there was secured from property that was guaranteed. So we see from here, meaning say, let's say Reuven sold a field with witnesses, and then and he says, I'm guaranteeing it. And then the next person came and basically sold something to Reuven. The person can come and reclaim that property. But why? How could he be expected to know if you say there's no noise for witnesses? So it must be that even with witnesses, you could expect there to be word about it. So the Gemara is going to answer. So the Gemara answers, Hasam. Hold on 1 second. There, in that case, Lekuchos, they were purchasers, and Avsidu Anavshaya. There, in that case, they were purchasers. They lost it. They took it was their responsibility because they threw their money out for nothing. But in this case, there's 3 people. Then the Ma'ar should not make a complaint because why is it his fault that he sold without a contract? He wasn't the purchaser. He's not the one who took the risk. The other case, the purchasers took the risk that they had the exposure. But in this case, this guy was the Ma'ar. It's a totally different scenario. He sold his property to this person, and then they went out and did this transaction. How's he supposed to know? He's not taking any other risk. So the Gemara says, does Rav really say this case that if a person sells a field to somebody else and he accepts upon himself a guarantee, and then when the other debtors come and they collect the field from the purchaser, then the purchaser can go and collect it from the seller, even from assets that were guaranteed, or that there was a lien on them, or that it sold to other people. How does Rav really say that? Didn't Rav tell us? Didn't we learn in the Mishnah? And we're going to get to this, that if you that if you want to lend money by a contract, then you can collect from a property that there's a lien on it. But if you do it through witnesses, then you can collect only from free and clear property. So you can collect without a contract. From the Mishnah says explicitly, you can collect from the Chasim Mishubadim without a contract. Witnesses are not sufficient. Again, if you want to say, well, listen, Rav is arguing with them, and he's allowed to because he's an explicit Tana. He has the authority to argue because he's like a Tana. He can argue with the Mishnah. But this is a common position. Both Rav and Shmuel themselves both said. Rav himself said that if it's an oral loan, you can collect not from the heirs, woman al kuchos. So therefore, you're not allowed to collect from the purchasers. You can't collect through an oral loan. You can't go into the property that was purchased. So the Gemara says, Malva Zabini Karamas, don't raise a question for me by comparing a loan to a sale. Malva ki kayazif bitsina kayazif. A loan will happen privately, and so the person won't know about it. And so therefore, you're not going to be able to collect from it. The guy, if ever the word gets out that he's borrowing money, then his assets will go down. People think it's a fire sale. Zabine, but the guy who's selling, the guy who's selling, even if there's just witnesses, the word will get out because the guy who wants to sell wants everybody to know about it. You sell, you want people to know about it. And there's a question, who wants the people to know, the seller or the purchaser? Fine, there's two different ways to read it, but the sale is more public than a loan. A loan is secretive. Gemara says, Tan Rabbanan, this is already tomorrow's daf because I'm not sure when we're going to get up to do tomorrow's daf. So hopefully we'll be able to do it, but if I don't, this will count. Tan Rabbanan, Acha Av Shana V'Ben Shtayim, Av Shtayim V'Ben Shana, Av Shana V'Ben Shana, V'Alkeach Shana, Areizu Chazaka. So we're talking about a case where the Chazaka was established by the father and the son together, or the father and the son and a purchaser. They each had it for 1 year. So under these circumstances, this is going enough to establish a chazaka. This, remember, we had the question before: can you have three different people? So we said shloshim mitzarfin. Here, the Brisa says that you could have three different people coming together to establish a chazaka. Meimar, this is to say, the okeach is like kola, that if one purchases it, people know about it, and then Ma'arer should have known, and therefore chazaka is established. There are many, but we have a contradictory source. Also, b'fnei av shana, that if you ate it in front of the father for 1 year, b'fnei ben shtayim, b'fnei av shtayim, b'fnei ben shana, b'fnei av shana, b'fnei ben shana, b'fnei lokel shana, arei ze chazaka. So that if somebody else, basically the machzik is using it for 3 years against the father and the son who are the ma'arers, or a purchaser, that's a chazaka. It's like, oh, I don't think to say if somebody purchases it, there's word about it. That is their mecha, that they objected. He sold it. That shows he doesn't think you own it. So Amar Rav Papa Kitanya. So Rav Papa says Rav Papa Kitanya b'mocher sedos of stam. No, that brisa is talking about a case that the guy was just selling all of his assets. He said all his assets. So it wasn't clear that he sold this one that this guy was living in. And so therefore, that's why it's not necessarily al-macha. We'll just finish this Mishnah and then we'll stop there. Just finish this next Mishnah. Ha'umnin v'hashutfin v'harisin v'hapatropsin ein lam chazaka. These are people who don't establish a chazaka that they've been living in the land. And the reason is because they're anyway using the land. Like there are people who are hired to work the land, mumnin, shutfin, or partners, arisin, sharecroppers, apotropsin, executors. They don't establish chazaka by being in the land because they're supposed to be on the land, but that doesn't mean they own it. And also, loa ish chazaka b'nechsei ishtov, loa isha chazaka b'nechsei ba'ala. A man doesn't get, if he's using his wife's property, it doesn't mean he's established a chazaka. And a woman who's using her husband's property, it doesn't mean she's established a chazaka in her husband's property. Also, a parent and a child, and vice versa. When do we say this? The machzef, which a person is using the property, he's got the property, and he says it's his. And then the ma'ara comes to make a complaint and brings it to his. Matana, but a person who gives a gift in front of us to his friend, and he says to him, I want you to take possession of it, or brothers who are dividing up the property, and somebody who grabs a hold of the property of convert, i.e. ownerless property, no, the parents chazaka. And so now we've transferred in the second half of the Mishnah, now going into another aspect of the chapter. We're no longer talking about chazaka as a proof that this was yours. We're now talking about how does somebody use an action to acquire something. And so therefore, these people can acquire something by being no gadar parents. You basically lock the door or build a fence or basically or make a breach in the fence. This is a chazaka that would allow anybody to acquire something from somebody else. So okay, so we'll stop here. This is we did the daf yomi. Shkoyach to everybody for your patience. I don't know. I doubt I'll be able to do it tonight because I know my